How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. We're here to answer the journey of how do we know about what we know about turfgrass science. My name is Ashanti Moore, and I have our guest today, Dr. Travis Shaddox. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Ashanti. Today was my son's 14th birthday, so we had some cake and some Zoom meetings with his family on another continent and another state. So I just got some birthday cake tonight. It's been nice. How are you doing, Ashanti?
I'm doing quite well. Missing the NBA game tonight, but we'll see if the
who's
Rockets
playing?
Win.
Oh, Houston's playing.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been watching Major League Baseball, watching, Shohei make men look like little boys. So I've been watching. And then the World Series, I guess, starts on Friday. So, yeah. So I keep up with some sports, but I haven't been keeping up with the NBA much at all. So anyway, so the Rockets are playing tonight. Okay. Well, everybody can TiVo it and watch it after the show, I guess.
Oh, yeah. All right. So the topic we'll be covering tonight will be the rise and fall of university turfgrass programs. Before we get started, just a reminder to like and subscribe. Also, we are currently doing a fundraiser. I believe it's still open. And Travis, you want to give us more details?
Yeah, sure. All the money for this channel that comes in supports the actual channel itself, keep it staying operational. And we also do research. So any of the remaining funds actually go to research. And occasionally we need additional resources to get things published. Sometimes these publication fees are several $1,000s. And so we have a GoFundMe. So if you go to GoFundMe.com and just search for Turfgrass Epistemology will come up. And if you would like to contribute to Turfgrass publishing and research, that would be a good opportunity to do that if you're so inclined, or just be a member of the channel at YouTube. That also goes to support turfgrass research.
Okay, fantastic. All right, let's hop right into it. So let's start with context. What is the land grant university, and how was the partnership between universities and agriculture industries, especially turfgrass, originally intended to work?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad we have an opportunity to talk about this tonight. So for those who may not know, and I often run into this where people sometimes just don't even realize how the system was set up, is that each state in the United States has a land grant institution, and I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20 have two of them. And the way that was set up, the reason we have these land grant universities is because of an act passed by Congress. I believe it's called the Morrill Act of 1862. It was passed by Congress and signed in the Lincoln administration to establish agricultural and mechanical education in each state to support farmers, whether it be livestock at the time or growing soybeans or corn or whatever it is. The Congress back then recognized that we have a growing nation. We're going to need help growing food, and the farmers are going to need some assistance in education on how to become more efficient at growing more food on their land. So it was in 1862 when we passed that act. It's called the Morrill Act. Not the moral as in you have good morals, but the Morrill Act. I think it's Morrill. Someone can look it up and put it in the chat. And then a second round of that occurred, I think it was in 1890. I think it was called the Second Morrill Act, I think. And that established a second round of agricultural and mechanical universities, primarily focused at the black population that did not have access at that time to higher education. So these will be universities today that are like Florida A&M, which are traditional black universities. There's a whole round of those universities that came through in 1890. So some states, I think it's around 16 or 17 states, have two ag land grant universities in their state. So that's how the system was initially set up through Congress, basically the federal government. So if anybody's ever wondered, what does our federal government do for us? Where's all my tax money going? Well, there is an example where the federal government established these universities, and through that an initial act, 150 years ago, we've seen great production and great efficiencies in agricultural and mechanical disciplines.
I believe it's been 150 years. Wow.
Has it been? Yeah. Quick math, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. But but we get that question a lot. Like, well, where are my tax dollars going? I got bad streets I'm driving on, and all these other things. And there's obviously some arguments to be made there. But I don't think people recognize, or at least I think sometimes we forget just because it's been so long, we haven't been taught on the history. But none of these universities would have existed had there not been a congressional act passed. Some of these universities existed, but not not dedicated for agricultural mechanical needs. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That takes us to our next question. So, how did these Turfgrass programs first emerge?
Well, it was in 1914 or 1918, something like that. There was another round of congressional bills that were passed that established the extension component of universities, which I'm going to go into next week in more detail. But the way in which the turfgrass industry or the university programs emerged was through advocacy from the turfgrass industry on almost all cases. So I can't speak for every state and every turfgrass program, but for example, at the University of Florida, there was no turfgrass program until the industry recognized that they have a lot of problems and a lot of issues and questions that they didn't have answers to. So a lot of the big names that you'll see in Florida, like on stadiums and on counties and things like that, a lot of those businessmen down in South Florida, usually it seems like it comes from South Florida, they recognized there was a need and they would advocate for a position to open up at the university dedicated simply to turfgrass research and extension. So it was through the efforts of industry that these programs emerged. Now, is that the case in every university? Perhaps not, but that's a lot of the universities were the impetus or the initiation of the program came from industry advocacy. That's where they came from, yeah.
Okay. So Turfgrass began, industry was working with university for probably most of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
They were thriving. So what did that partnership look like when it was strongest? And I guess, how did both sides really benefit from the success of each other?
Yeah, that's a good question, yeah. And I think it's important to recognize this. So the University of Florida, I'll speak for Florida because I was there for so long. I can't remember the exact date, but it was somewhere, I think in the 30s or 40s when it first started to emerge. And in the 40s and 50s was when it really started to flourish. And really from the 60s to about the mid to late 90s is when it was really in its heyday. And then when the millennium turned over in 2000, it was when it was really at its peak. And then it started to decline since then. The last 25 years or so, it started to decline, as have other turfgrass programs around the United States. The reason I think why it was so successful for so long was because, 60 years ago, when these university positions were opened up, they were opened up as a result of the industry advocating for a position. They were telling the university and the deans and the chairs, and maybe even the provost, we need help. We need some assistance. We're down here in Miami and we're having problems with our fairways, or we're having problems with our sod production, or whatever the case is, and we don't know who to turn to. You have to remember, back then there were no cell phones. There was no internet. Okay, people were getting their news literally from the newspapers and from radio programs, radio news, and things like that. So the information didn't transfer as easily back then. So they needed help. And the reason I think it was successful is because the academicians and the scholars that were hired in these positions recognized that they were in these positions because Joe Smith advocated for me to have this position. So there was a close relationship between, this is why I'm here, between the university and the golf course superintendents, or whether lawn care operators or saw producers or sport complex people. There was a very close relationship between them because the industry is saying, we need you. The university is saying, we hear you. Here's this person to help you. And they worked very closely together for many decades. And I always get a kick out of seeing these old photos from like 1940s and 50s and 60s. where the university faculty were always in white shirts and black ties, even in the middle of the Florida summer. It was super hot, and they'd still be out there in these ties, very professional. And that continued all the way into the 60s and 70s. And in the 80s, I think it kind of got a little less formal. But I think the reason why it was so successful is because, like I said, there was such a good relationship between we need help, here's the help, and it was back and forth. It was back and forth, and there was a lot of collegiality between industry and the university faculty. That's why I think it was so successful, because there was just such a friendship and relationship between the two.
Okay. So something had to shift, and over the past 30 years, like, how would you describe the trajectory of Turfgrass programs, and I guess the impact of technology and maybe even AI nowadays?
Yeah. That's the last chapter, really, or the most recent chapter is the downfall. What has been going on since the 2000s? I mean, we all know golf course numbers have been declining since around 2008, 2009. There's been a reduction in the programs. I graduated with a bachelor's in 97. I think I got my PhD in 2004 or so. So that was right at the peak of all the really, really big interest and push in the industry. That was probably at its peak at that time. And since then, the turf programs at these universities, the seats have been dwindling and dwindling. There's been fewer and fewer students go through the programs, fewer classes offered. In some cases, entire programs have shut down. So that's what I've seen them continue to erode and erode and erode. And what I think, it's probably a leap to some degree, but I think there's a very close correlation between that erosion and the change from this person is here to help the industry in the view of the administrators. This person was advocated for by the industry. That changed somewhere along the line of, okay, instead of this person helping the industry, now this person actually has to go out and get grants. They have to actually go find funding and grant money, because in the 1970s, there was no grant money for the universities. It was all funded through the federal and state and local agencies. They weren't allowed to go get grant money. Now they're forced to go get grant money. And when that happened, the chairs and the deans are looking at faculty positions and going, well, I have an extension position that's 100% extension. He's not bringing in any money. He can't bring any money. He's not in research. We're going to have to switch that to where they have a little bit of research so they can get some funding so they can get tenure. Okay, so when that happens, now all of a sudden there's a little bit diversion from the industry by the faculty and by the administrators. So I think there's a relationship there where there's been erosion of seats in the classrooms. There's been a separation of faculty from the industry, primarily, in my opinion, as a result of the faculty's need to go get grant money rather than spending their time and effort devoted to the very industry that advocated for their position. It's a strange paradox. It's bizarre. But that's what's happened. And I've seen this happen for 10, 20 years now, where there's a slow erosion. There's fewer and fewer chairs. Programs like Kentucky have completely shut down. Other universities like Washington State and Oregon State have been dwindling. Missouri is barely alive. Nebraska now has had a faculty retire, and they had another faculty member move into a different area of the industry. So now that program is certainly at jeopardy. And when those things happen, somebody's got to step up to the plate and advocate for that program to continue, for those faculty lines to continue. And if the faculty haven't been spending time with the industry, they don't know them, right? Because they're off getting grant money and the industry's off doing their thing, staying busy. That's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's what's happened.
Okay. So similar to, I guess, how companies lobby Congress all the time, advocating for laws that benefit them or their industry.
There has to be somebody at the table or you're on the menu. And that's what it comes down to with a lot of places and issues in our society, and faculty positions are no different.
I mean, obtaining funding is nothing new. What makes it so unique of a challenge for the turfgrass industry?
Well, the funding was new in the 70s and 80s. In other words, like the 70s, they didn't need funding because they were given they were giving an allotment of funding, and they weren't allowed to bring in industry money. But once the taxes started going away, they had to replace those fundings with something. So the administrators and the faculty were like, well, we got to go get grant money from somewhere. So they would go get grant money from wherever, and that reality. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault per se. It's just the reality that they have to go get money somewhere. That reality is now they're diverted from extension to research where the money is. And suddenly my friend over here and my industry partner who advocated for this position, I'm spending 1 day less a week with him. Now I'm spending 1 day up in Washington, D.C. or Tallahassee or in wherever advocating for my grant money. And then the next year it's 2 days over here and 1 less day over there. And it's just a slow process where now you cannot find a 100% extension program or 100% extension faculty member. It is extremely, extremely rare, at least someone who's not already grandfathered in. You won't find a new one because the faculty know. And the deans and the chairs know that faculty member is not going to get tenure if they do not get grants, grad students, and publications. And that's what it comes down to. There's nowhere in there is extension. Faculty are getting tenure on grants, grad students, and publications. And if you have 100% extension, you don't check any of those boxes. So that's what it comes down to. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Maybe there's a tone in my voice like it's a bad thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. It's just saying that's the reality that we're in. And because of that, I think academy, the universities have turned their back on the industry to some degree. The industry is very busy. Cell phones have been a major problem because back in the day, you have to remember, back in the day, the FTGA would sell out the Tampa Bay Convention Center. The FTGA would sell out the Tampa Bay Convention Center in the 70s. Now you can't get hardly anybody to show up to the FTGA. They would show up because that's where they went to buy their goods and services. The superintendents, remember, there wasn't even any long distance phone calls back in the 70s. I mean, it was very difficult to communicate. So everybody would travel to the conferences to buy their goods and services then, that one show a year. And then cell phones show up, and the salesman now can go out in the field, and now the salesmen are going to the customer, and now the customer doesn't need to go to the conferences. And so there's just been, a natural progress and a progression away from this collegiality that we once experienced when the turf programs were at their highest, I think. Yeah.
As that happens, it just becomes less and less visible everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, it's just the reality we're in. It's like getting upset that, we have electric cars or something. Well, you're not going to prevent it. It's going to continue. I mean, it's just the way it is. Yeah. We just have to learn how to continue to remain collegial within this new framework that we live in. Yeah.
Adapt and survive.
Yeah.
All right. So as you said, enrollment numbers have dropped as Turfgrass programs have kind of declined. Do you see that as like the root cause for the weaker communication between, the industry and academia and maybe even students, or is it something else that might be causing that?
Well, I think it's a symptom of the problem. I don't think it's causing. I don't think having fewer students in the classrooms are causing the issue. I think it's a symptom of the issue. In other words, the students, there was very few people in turf programs until there was a really, really big need for turf superintendents and lawn car operators and saw operators. There's a big need for that, and suddenly the chairs get filled up. Well, and we're teaching, we're doing extension, we're doing some research, yes. But and again, I don't know if this is, maybe another scholar would come on and disagree with me, and that's fine. But as academicians have diverted their attention further and further away from their stakeholders who advocated for them, I think the fewer and fewer collegial opportunities that exist, the less advocacy exists, the less administrators recognize that there's saw producers that need our help because the saw producers are no longer coming and talking to them. The superintendents are no longer coming and talking to them. But who is? The blueberry people are, the cattlemen are, the watermelon people are, strawberry people are, tomato people are. All these people are constantly talking and telling people that how much they appreciate the academicians, how much they need them, how much they've supported them, how much, how valuable they are. They're constantly in those dean's offices. They're constantly in the chair's offices. I don't mean every day. I mean, once a year they're in there. They're talking to them. And I don't see that happening near as much from the turfgrass industry. I don't see the industry needs to be a little bit more active in advocating for these positions, a little more open and communicating, letting the administrators know that we exist and that we need support. And the academicians need, and particularly the chairs, need to fight to protect their extension appointments, because they take 10% away from an extension and give it to research. And the next year they take 10 more and give it to research. And next thing you know, you got a faculty member with 20% extension and 80% research. Well, they used to have 80% extension, and now that faculty member is no longer spending time with the stakeholders. No wonder the stakeholders aren't in their offices helping them out. You know, it's a strange juxtaposition. It's really odd. But ultimately, what it comes down to is collegiality has weakened, I think, as a result of universities turning their back on industry, is what I think it is. They focus more and more on research and less on extension. And as a result, we have fewer and fewer students in the classrooms. Programs are closing. The industry is less supportive. There's not as much advocacy nowadays as there used to be in the 70s and 80s. And here we are. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about shared responsibility. So has the turfgrass industry done enough to advocate for faculty positions and research funding?
Yeah. That's what I was talking about. Yeah, I don't think it's completely on the university's shoulders to shoulder the load of why we've fallen off the wagon here. Okay, it is. We're all in the same boat together, and it does take. At the end of the day, here's the reality, Ashani. These university faculty positions in turfgrass simply do not exist if it's not for industry need. They won't exist. If there is no industry need for these faculty positions, then they'll just go away. They've fought and advocated for these turf positions. That's why they're there. So whether university faculty recognize it or not, they're there because some company president or saw producer or golf course superintendent association or somebody, maybe it was 100 years ago, but somebody advocated for that turf program to open up because they needed help. And that's an important to keep an eye on that. Now, having said that, we're greatly appreciative of the industry support. The issue is throughout the heyday where we've done so well, there was such collegiality. Everything's cooking along just great. Now things have started to dip down, and it's going to take the industry. Unfortunately, in this case, I don't believe the academy can actually do this. It can't come from faculty. Of course, faculty are going to argue that they need the positions, but it takes the industry, not every week going in there knocking on the chair's door, but once a year you need to show up to the chair and to the dean and hopefully the provost, but at least the chair and the dean, and just go in, say hello, knock on the door, say thank you, we appreciate it, we really need Dr. Smith, he does a lot for our needs, he saves us a lot of money, and whatever the case is. Just once a year go in and say hello, and so they know there's a voice, they can put a name with a face. And they know that, Bob Jones, the Superintendent Association president, is going to be in my office in 6 months. And I know he represents 200 courses and he represents 1,000 jobs or whatever the case is. It's going to take that regular routine advocacy to turn this ship back in the right direction. I think it's going to take that. It took them to start it. And I think it's going to take when I say them, the industry, it took the industry to start the programs up. And I think it's going to take the industry and the continued voice of the industry and advocacy to get the programs back to where they need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It looks like Carpet Bombers added something in chat saying Big Ag is coming to talk and ask and find out. Exactly.
Yeah. Big Ag is, we're the turfgrass is kind of like the dirty soul of the boot heel of Big Ag. We get the leftover scraps from Big Ag.
I was gonna say the redheaded stepchild.
Yeah, we are. We really are.
So I guess to pick up advocacy, rebranding has been suggested, and maybe even merging turfgrass science with a broader field like horticulture or urban ecology. Do you see that as a way to rebuild institutional visibility, or does it risk turfgrass just kind of being lost?
Yeah, I don't want to be one of these old curmudgeons that says, no, we can't change and we got to keep it the way it is. That's no way to progress. But there is a concern that we would lose our identity. I understand that, but it's one of those things where you get on the bus or you're going to get left behind, sort of thing. So there is rebranding going on, maybe not necessarily, within a department or moving to a different department, something like that. There's not so much of that, but there is more of a movement more towards 2-year programs from 4-year programs, so that students can recognize they can still get a 2-year, what do they call it? A certificate. And there are many, many superintendents who make very good livings and are very successful with 2-year certificates. In fact, the majority that I know have 2-year certificates. I mean, they're very, very good. So there is a movement more towards like a 2-year certificate sort of branding rather than having a 4-year bachelor's degree. But in terms of moving them into like a different identity, like environmental horticulture, and then turfgrass is a component of that, you got to be real careful with that, because that's happened in a couple of cases, particularly at UF. And when that happens, some faculty member is going to have to be there to continue to fight to push for that, to have that word turfgrass in the student class book or whatever, because once it gets out or once it gets hidden, it's kind of like marketing. If no one knows it's there, then no one's going to recognize it and enroll in it. So I would say I'm open, definitely open. We have to continue to build and grow and look at new opportunities. And one of those is 2-year programs. One of those may be online programs. A lot of that has happened, but sort of moving us into another area, I think there's a lot of concern with that. And in terms of we might get overlooked and sort of put on the back shelf if there's not somebody there to fight for it and to continue to keep the name turfgrass up in the forefront. Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with trade school.
Yeah. No, I mean, Lake City is another casualty. I mean, I don't know how many good superintendents, hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of superintendents that come out of Lake City, Florida. Edison Community College also got canceled. Lake City got canceled. I mean, these programs are collapsing, and it's a shame to see that. I'm not saying they wouldn't collapse if industry was more active in their advocacy efforts, but I do think there would be fewer of them, or there would be less likelihood of it. I can speak for myself in Kentucky. When the whole thing at Kentucky came down, it was a weird timing thing. It would still be here if it wasn't for some really strange timing with some COVID issues that came up. But when it first came down, and there was this talk about being removed, the whole program is being removed, I had been talking to the industry about, we need to come in and say hello to the chair. You need to come in and say hello to the dean. You don't need to come in and ask for help or ask for money or ask for anything. Don't ask for anything. But you need to come in just so that she knows that you exist. Because if something ever does happen, it's much more difficult to just cut off a program when you're looking at the face of the program. This program has a face, and the face is Joe and John and Bob and Jason and all these. These are people that they're cutting off. It's very difficult to do that. Well, they didn't do that at Kentucky. They didn't go in and talk to the chair. They didn't go and talk to the dean. And just out of pure coincidence, the opportunity came up to close the program, and the chair and the dean took the opportunity and whacked it. There was no chance it was ever going to stay up at that point. So again, I'm not saying it would have saved it, but I'm just saying the likelihood would have been much greater to keep it if there would have been more advocacy and more relationship and collegiality from the industry here in Kentucky. Yeah, that's my viewpoint.
I guess on the topic of COVID, I know we've spoken about this on previous sessions. It kind of had a spike in the DIYers because everyone's stuck at home. You think that can help us with getting more advocacy for turfgrass?
Well, the lawn care community and the homeowner community is really interesting in several regards when it comes to the university. So can it help? In other words, can the COVID and DIY and more people being active at home and lawn care, can that help sort of advocacy? It can. The issue is that there's not a clear identity or an association like there is in the Golf Course Association or the Saw Producers Association or the Sports Field Managers Association. There's not really a clear association. So if Joe Smith from 721 North Illinois Street calls up the dean, says something, I'm not saying they wouldn't listen. I mean, they are a stakeholder. They would listen for sure. But that doesn't hold as much weight as if the president of, I'll leave the associations out, of the State Association of Golf comes in and says, hey, we've been donating $100,000 a year for the last couple of years, and I heard you're going to close the program. What's going on? Or whatever the case is, So there's a weight behind the organization. So for DIYers and for lawn care operators, I wish there was like a unified association that would speak to their needs, because the Golf Course Association, the Sport and Sod, and these people, they have associations and clear identities. We have BMPs, we have these things, and we have clear identities that we can call, and the presidents and the chairs and all these people we can call and talk to. Well, what do we do with DIYers? I don't know how to organize that. I don't know how to put that in a package and give it to a chair and say, look, all these homeowners need our help. So there's something there, Shawnee. I wouldn't know how to start organizing that into a meaningful advocacy group, if that's what you want to call it. But it would have tremendous power if we're able to figure that out. Yeah. Imagine
the Homeowners Association of Turfgrass.
Something. Yeah. Imagine somebody going in and representing, 30,000 homeowners in Lexington, Kentucky. That would get somebody's attention real quick. Not in a bad way. I mean, not in a bad way. I mean, just to have a voice, have a voice. This is what, we need help, because we have, well, for example, here's a horrible situation in Kentucky. They lay sod with the plastic netting below it in Lexington. And when I first came here, I'm like, what is this? They lay it down. They don't pull the plastic netting off. And so all these, particularly right up here up at the new, Drake's up here on Lexington, there's a bar, and they have a little grass area where people go outside and they have drinks. The netting's all up. People are tripping all over this thing. Well, you can't pull it out. Well, the homeowners or the builders association or somebody, if they had a voice, they could say, hey, we can't tolerate this, because now we got to go in and tear all this sod up to get this netting out that they shouldn't even have put down to begin with. But they don't have a voice to do that. If you got 20, 30,000 people showing up at the mayor's office or the DEP's office saying, this is not acceptable, that's how to get policy changed in a favorable way. Yeah. But you can't, we can't do that with
milk commercials now and dairy commercials now. So why not homeowners?
Yeah. Yeah. The homeowners are the big draw. I mean, homeowners have less knowledge generally, but they have such a massive impact on products and services compared to anything you want to compare in golf or sport turf. Not even close. I mean, because there's just so many homeowners. So if there was a way to corral that and put that in a nice package, that'd definitely be a tremendously powerful group. Yeah.
Well, extensions once served as a bridge between faculty and industry. How has the reduction in extension positions affected communication and ultimately survival of these turfgrass programs?
Well, the extension is what I'll talk about a lot more in detail next week. The extension was the third leg of the land-grant university system. It came on in the early 1900s, where they recognized they had education and research from these universities, but they didn't have anybody out extending that information to the stakeholders. And that's what I was talking about sort of at the beginning of the episode today, is that the reality is that the faculty in today's society, there's just no way they're ever going to get tenure without grants, grad students, and publication. It's just not going to be possible at a land grant institution. It's impossible. And when a position opens up, I don't know if people understand this or not, but or recognize this or understand how the system works, but these positions aren't turf positions. They're not blueberry positions. They're not cattle positions. It's just a faculty line in the state budget. And so when that faculty leaves or retires or passes away or whatever, well, if they're an extension line and they happen to be from the 1970s and 80s and 90s, which still exists here, one of the best extension faculty that I've ever worked with is right here in University of Kentucky, and he has 100% extension. He's fantastic. But he comes from an older era. Now, when he retires, that line's going to go back to the chair and to the dean. They can either put it right back into forage crops. They can put it in genetics. They can put it in turf. They can put it wherever they want. Well, where's the greatest need? Okay, check that box. Then, where are they going to get funding from? How are they going to get tenure? How are they going to bring in money? And so that 100% extension program, the faculty that I'm thinking of, I'll just mention his name. He's fantastic. Dr. Smith. He's fantastic. Ray Smith. It's awesome. Well, when he retires, you can bet the farm that his position is not going to be 100% extension. Not anymore. It'll be 60-40 research extension or 70-30 teaching extension or whatever the case is. So that slow erosion and reduction in extension is simply a result of the reality of grants, grad students, and publications. That's just the reality. So how do we change that when the voices of the industry are fewer and fewer and fewer? In other words, the chairs and the deans are going to go, well, he's not going to get tenure at 100% extension. So we have to switch it to something where he can get some money. Well, that's going to take away from the industry. The industry's not going to have his voice as much anymore because now he's got to spend time with grants and grad students. So if the industry's not talking to him, if the saw producers, in this case, I think he's in forage crops, if the forage producers aren't talking to the chairs and talking to the deans saying, no, we need it. We need him. We need 100%. We need someone to be with us. Then they're going to switch it. They're probably going to switch it anyway, to be honest. I mean, it's just reality. But they've got to figure out a way to protect those extension lines, what they're called, extension lines. They have to protect their extension appointment. So it is a major problem. It's the only official pathway to communicate to the end users is through the extension appointment. That's the official full-time equivalent is extension appointment. And if they're teaching and research and they have no extension, well, why am I going to go down to the FTGA and give a talk, or go to the Kentucky Turf Council and give a talk, or wherever, if it doesn't have anything to do with teaching or research? Because my tenure and promotion isn't going to be affected by it. So they're not going to show up at extension meetings if they don't have an extension appointment. So you got to protect it.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what would it take for universities and the Turfgrass industry to rebuild this partnership and ensure the next generation of faculty and students? And
another good question. So what would it take? I think from the university's perspective, the chairs, particularly the chairs, they have to fight to protect those percentages to continue to allow their faculty to communicate with the industry personnel. They have to recognize that they're there because the industry advocated for them to begin with. I understand there's a need for research. I got that. I understand they want butts in the seats so they can charge so much money for a credit hour. I got that too. Okay, they need teaching and they need research to bring the money in. I got that. But it's a land grant university. We're there to help the stakeholders, to help farmers, and in our world, to help turfgrass managers. But there has to be a chair in that position to fight and maintain protection of that extension role, because the deans are going to look at it and go, well, are they going to get tenure? Are they going to get enough money? Are they going to teach an extra class a semester or whatever? Well, if they're not going to do that, then we need to switch it. Well, the chair has to fight for, no, he or she needs that extra 20% because he's got to go down to Miami and help the saw producers. He or she has to help that. So from the university's perspective, they have to have someone in that position to fight for that extension role to maintain that ability for the faculty to collaborate. From the industry's role, I have pretty strong feelings about this. Hopefully I don't dig myself in a big hole here, but they have to recognize, yes, I know you're on your cell phone, you're at your office, you've got 15 people working for you, you got 100,000 things going on. Turfgrass is just one of them. I got it. People is usually the biggest issue with these superintendents and saw producers, money, and it's just all sorts of stuff. People showing up half drunk. You got robotics coming down, breathing down your neck, trying to figure out how to do. There's all these things going on. What I would advocate for is for the superintendents to choose one day a year, just one day a year, and go collectively, or pick 10 superintendents who represent the greater 1,000 superintendents or whatever, or the turf manager. I keep saying superintendents, but turf managers. And go and set up a time to visit with the chair for 10 or 15 minutes, not 3 hours. You're not going to be able to get a chair to sit down for 3 hours. They're too busy. 10 or 15 minutes at the same day. Set up a time to go talk to the dean for 10 or 15 minutes. And if they don't show up, talk to the dean of extension, whoever. But set up a time, get up there in the morning, say, hello, how are you? We really appreciate all you do for the turfgrass industry. We can't thank you enough. What can we do to support you guys? What do you need from the industry? and just be there to put a face with a name, and then go right to the dean's office and do the same thing. Go get some coffee and get lunch, and then go back to your course or go back to your business or whatever. I think something along those lines is going to have to happen in order for the academy to switch their brain back the way it used to be, where it's like, wait a second, these faculty are here to support the turf managers, not the other way around. Okay, the turf managers advocated for them. So we have to allow them, protect their time so they can go support the very people that actually need their help. I know the research is great. I know the teaching is great. I understand that. But it's the industry that needs our support, and we have to protect that time. And the industry, in turn, has to dedicate at least one day a year. And I know, for example, in Florida, there's a group that go up to Tallahassee, and they visited with the governor this last year. I think they've done 2 years in a row. They visited with the governor of Florida, DeSantis. Okay, so this does happen. This does occur. And I'm sure it occurs in other states, in Pennsylvania, Michigan. I'm sure this occurs in some fashion, one way or the other. But please take the time to go to the chair of the department and to the dean, him or herself, for 10 or 15 minutes, say hello, shake their hands, thank you, whatever the case is, and then go back to your business and do that every year. You can't do it once. Doing it once makes you feel good, and I got that. Anybody can do it once. Anybody can grow grass one day. Anybody can grow a tall fescue in October in Lexington, Kentucky. Anybody can do that. The hard part is doing it in June and July and August. And the hard part with advocacy is doing it one day a year. Every year. Do it year after year after year. That's the hard part. And that's what I would challenge the industry to do.
Okay. Well, I do want to open it up a little bit for any questions in the chat. You want to put it in there. And while that happens, Dr. Shaddox, can you tell us where you'll be speaking in the coming weeks and a little bit about your schedule that's coming up?
Oh, yeah.
We should look forward to.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I've been getting a lot of questions about where I'll be speaking and when, and I think I have this, I'll be able to put up here. Yeah, so here's on the screen here, I'll say it for the people that are listening on podcast, are my lecture schedules for the remainder of 2025. I'll be speaking I've already spoken in Florida the last couple of days, and then I'll be in Salt Lake City on November 12th. I'll be speaking on soil test philosophies, as well as sulfur correlations as well in Salt Lake City at the American Society of Agronomy. So if you want to participate in that, you can just go to crops.org and then go to their national meeting, and you can see about the hotel and the times and so forth when I'll be speaking there. And then the very next week, I think that's November 12th, and then November 19th and 20th, I'll be at the Golf Turf Conference at University Park, Pennsylvania, again talking about soil test interpretations, and then I'll be doing a nutrient best management class or 1-hour lecture at the Penn State Golf Turf Conference there in where is it at? University Park, PA. I also have a recent publication that the members here helped publish on correlation and calibration of Malic 3 sulfur, that if anybody's interested in that, they can go to crops.org and just go to their publication in Crop Science. And I'll be talking about that document for, the next 6 months or so as I lecture. My lectures in January and February are not all completely set yet, but I do know I'll be in Nebraska in January, and then looks like I'll be in Virginia. I think it's the first week in February, I think it is. So that's what to look forward to as, throughout the winter lecture season.
Okay. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
We do have one question in the chat. Chuck Benzing 134 says, if every state has a land grant university, does every county have an extension office? Our CES is fantastic, but maybe that's the exception.
Yeah, I think Chuck, this is probably going to be a state by state specific situation. In general, yes, every county is going to have an extension office. I can't imagine that'd be the case in places like Alaska, or maybe Montana or something. Certainly, but they will have an extension office. Now, will that extension office have an extension agent that is knowledgeable in turfgrass? That's probably unlikely in every county. In fact, it is almost a 0% chance in every county. You're going to have some extension agents need to be pretty good at a lot of things. I am not pretty good at a lot of things. I'm really, 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 really good at like one thing. That's it. Well, extension agents have to be kind of good at everything. And some extension agents naturally gravitate towards certain topics that they happen to be comfortable with. Like some might be really good at blueberries, or some might be really good at blackberries or peaches, or whatever the case is. Some might be really good at gardening, whatever the case is. In some counties, you're going to have some that are naturally interested in turfgrass, and they may be really good at that. So I'll talk about that more next week, and the role that the extension agents play in terms of communicating the information from the faculty. In my experience, the interest from the extension agent's perspective on getting quality information from faculty has always been very, very good. The extension agents that I've worked with have always craved new information and new knowledge, and they want to know what message should we be extending to our stakeholders from your research program. They're always really, really good about that, and I'll talk about that more next week.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we have one more we could fit in from, seeing that right, B Smith 001. What can we do to get more young adults involved in turfgrass and keep the turfgrass colleges alive?
Yeah, B Smith, I wish I had an answer to that question. I don't know if anybody has a really good answer to that question. Inevitably, this comes up at science meetings. Someone will ask this question among faculty members. What can we do? And when faculty members start telling their story about, well, how did you get involved, or how did I get interested in it? Up to at least my generation, the stories are almost always the same, and they almost always go something like this. I grew up on a farm, or I grew up on a tractor, or I grew up in my dad's garden, or I was always outside planting something with my mom. It usually starts like that. Okay. Now, the next generation is naturally going to have a different experience. They're not going to be outside as much. They don't seem to have as much interest in nature. There's sometimes a sense of entitlement, oftentimes more in the next generation, because they weren't outside as much. So how can we get more young adults involved? It's a culture shift from being outdoors to being indoors. And I think that's a result of technology. When I was a kid, the only thing we had indoors that had electricity was a speak and spell. Okay, I mean, that's it. That's the reason I was always outside on my bike, or always out in the apple orchard, always out picking tomatoes or okra or whatever it was. I was always outside doing something all the time. I mean, my curfew was when the street lights go off in the morning, you can go outside, and when they come back on, you better be home. That was it. That doesn't exist nowadays. And I'm not saying we're better or worse. I'm sure my previous generation is saying something similar about my generation. We're progressing. We're changing. But this generation, when they have screens in front of them, they have computers in front of them, they have cell phones at their hand, they can get all the information they'd ever need at the touch of their fingers. They're not outside. They're not outside getting stung by bees and climbing trees and wrecking bikes. And they're not outside doing these things, planting things and watering flowers and, cutting open cantaloupes. And I remember some of the fondest memories I have was when I'm picking cantaloupes with my grandfather, or tomatoes, and you come across one and a bird had damaged part of it, or there was a tomato hornworm on one of the tomatoes, or whatever the case was, and they were eating it. That was one of the greatest things, because I could just take my knife and cut it off and then just take a massive bite out of the other half of the cantaloupe because it was ruined. You couldn't sell it. And I was like, that's great. I'm going to give me the other half of that thing. I would just eat it right in the middle of the field. Kids don't have those experiences anymore. So how do we get somebody who's not naturally now inclined to be outdoors and to have their hands green and have their feet green and be outside working in the soil? Well, it's like asking someone who doesn't speak German to suddenly speak German, go to Berlin and have them fit perfectly in a culture that they are completely ignorant to. So I don't have an answer to that question, but I can tell you what I'm doing in my house, and this has only been in the last year or so, is we've cut off all screens. There are no screens in my house. My kids are now 9 and 14. As of today, my son turned 14, and they'll tell you the only screen time is for their homework. That's it. And we personally in my house have seen a massive, massive change in their behavior, in their patience, and their approach to things in the house and outdoors. My daughter is now outside in the backyard a lot now, because what is she going to do inside? What can I do inside, Dad? I tell him, read a book, read a book, or go outside. And so for us, my wife and I have made a conscious decision to try that, to see what will work. But what you can do for the larger society, B. Smith, I don't know how you get someone to suddenly speak German overnight when they've never spoken a word in their life. And I think that's the reality we're facing. They're just not used to working outside with their hands. And I just don't know if you can suddenly get a young adult to be more involved with turfgrass, which is almost all outdoors. You have to be outdoors in turfgrass science one way or the other. Even if you're in science in the lab, you still have to have some outdoor activity at some point. And I don't know how to get someone to suddenly love doing that if they haven't in the past.
Can I go outside and yell, go touch some grass?
Yeah. Well, when I cut my lawn, and when I was in South Florida, I had the OSHA whatever guy come out there and tell me to put my shoes on one day. Because when I cut grass, I don't wear any shoes. I like walking in the grass with no shoes on, no socks on. I like feeling the grass on my bare soles. And I would do that down in Fort Lauderdale at the research center. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but he's like, "What are you doing? You need to have hard sole shoes on." I'm like, ugh. Because when I'm walking across the grass, I liked the feel of the grass. I could feel where it was hot. I could feel where it was cold. I could even feel where it was dry or wet. I just felt like I was in closer touch with what was going on the different plots. Now, call me crazy, but that's just the way I grew up. I grew up with no shoes on. What are you going to do? And so, to ask somebody to do that naturally now, go out there and do that. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that. Basically we need to get more farm kids is what we need. To be frank, we need to get more kids that know how to milk a cow, know how to, skin some chickens and fish and do all these things. And we're just moving in a different direction. And that's fine. Like I said, my mom's generation probably said something similar about us, and, it's just the natural progression. But it is difficult to find people to be interested in turfgrass if they haven't had a natural inclination for agriculture in the past.
All right. Well, to close, can you summarize how the relationship between faculty and industry has shaped the rise and now fall, and maybe even the rebuild of turfgrass programs?
Yeah. So tonight, what we've been talking about is the university land grant system and the turfgrass programs at these universities. And what I've done is I've made an argument that the programs at these universities were developed in large part as a result of the industry advocating for the position, because the industry had a great need for it. The success of the turfgrass programs at universities was in large part a result of the collaboration between industry and the faculty positions throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even in the 80s. There was a very good, strong relationship. And I've argued since then it's split because the universities have now turned away from extension and have been more focused on research and teaching, less so on extension. And on the industry side, they've been focused more on getting the job done, spending time at the university, spending time at their courses or whatever the case is. And they haven't been advocating as much as they used to in the past. And we've seen the decline occur in the last 10 or 15, 20 years.
Well, that's all we have for this episode. Turfgrass Epistemology will return next Tuesday when Dr. Shaddox discusses the role of extensions. On behalf of Dr. Shaddox, I'm Ashanti Moore. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.